Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lecture on Simple Storage Service, or S3 for short, and S3 Glacier, we'll start off by looking at the S3 storage classes and how they differ according to reliability, durability, and of course price. We'll look at the long-term archiving solution that is provided by Amazon S3 Glacier. We'll also talk about how we can implement a life cycle management rule that can automatically migrate old data in Amazon S3 over to long-term archiving in Amazon Glacier. We'll talk about how we can replicate our data in Amazon S3 across different regions. And finally, we'll talk about Amazon Macie and how it can monitor our S3 buckets and identify any security issues. We already know what a bucket is. We know it's a container for objects that are stored in Amazon S3. What you may not already know is that the total volume of data and the number of objects is actually unlimited. So you can keep putting objects into a bucket and it will still keep growing to accept those objects. Bucket names, they must be unique across the whole of AWS, not just your account. They must be at least 3 and no more than 63 characters long. They can't be an IP address format, for example, 256.256.256, etc. So they cannot be like that as an IP address. They must be lowercase, they cannot have uppercase characters, and they must not contain underscores either. Objects, they're entities, and that could be data. For example, it could be a picture, it could be a video, and also they have metadata attached to those objects as well. They can vary from 0 bytes to a maximum of 5 terabytes. But the largest object that you can upload is 5 gigabyte. So if you want to upload a 5 terabyte object, you'll need to break it up into parts and use multi-part uploading to do that. S3, it's secure by default. So if we create a bucket and we just go through all of the default options and click on next and go through to the end, create that bucket, it will be secure. It will be a private bucket that only we can access. But of course, we can modify that. And as we've seen in the past, when we created our website, we can modify that so it has public access as well. So the ways that we can modify that is through IAM roles. So we can modify that for individual roles or individual users and groups, and that's with fine-grained control, but that is applied specifically to a user, groups of users, or a role. We can also apply a bucket policy to the actual bucket, and that's what we normally do. And then is a fine-grained control that is associated with that bucket itself, not against an individual user. So anyone that accesses that bucket will be under that bucket policy. And so if they don't have access, they won't be able to access that at all. Well, they don't have permission, they won't be able to access that. And finally, we have access control list. Now they can be applied at either the bucket or individual object level. So you can have a public bucket, and inside of that public bucket, you could have private objects based upon an access control list. There are a number of storage classes available for Amazon S3. So far, we've only been using the standard storage class, but of course there are quite a number of other ones that can provide us advantages depending on what the application is. So standard, it's going to give us 11 nines of durability. It's going to do that because the objects are replicated across 3 availability zones. It's going to give us 99.99% availability. Remember, there is a difference between availability and durability. Durability is about replication. Availability is about access to our objects when we need them. It supports SSL encryption, both in transit and at rest. And we can apply lifecycle management rules to S3 standard objects as well. The next one there is standard infrequent access. So we've got objects that we're not going to be accessing that regularly. We might consider infrequent access. So that's going to have the same features as S3 standard. It's going to have a slightly lower availability of 99.9%, and it's going to have a lower per gigabyte storage price than standard. But there is a trade-off. So you're going to be paying a per gigabyte retrieval fee. So if you're going to be accessing it regularly, it's going to probably cost you more than using standard. So this is for infrequently accessed objects to give you a bit of saving there. The next one there is standard one zone infrequent access. So that's going to be similar to the infrequent access or standard infrequent access. It's going to have a similar durability. The difference is that the replication is only going to occur in a single availability zone. So if you lose an availability zone, you're going to lose those objects in that standard one zone. So if that's an issue for you, you need to go for standard infrequent access, which is going to have multiple availability zones across 3 availability zones. It's going to have slightly lower, again, of availability, 99.5%. It's going to have a lower per gigabyte storage price than both standard and standard infrequent access. But it's also going to have a per gigabyte retrieval fee as well. And there is another storage class that it's a legacy one that's been retired and has been replaced with infrequent access. And that is the reduced redundancy storage class. So you don't need to know much about that. By all means, ignore it and concentrate on using one of the standard infrequent access types of storage classes. The final class there is S3, intelligent tiering. So that's the same as standard IA, but it doesn't have that retrieval fee. But it does have a small monthly monitoring and automation fee to manage these objects for you. So what it does for that monthly fee, it will automatically move your objects between 2 access tiers. So this service will have 2 tiers, one for frequently accessed and one for infrequently accessed objects. And so if objects haven't been accessed for 30 days, they'll be moved into that infrequent access tier. When they start to become more access, they'll be moved back from infrequent into that frequent access tier. So by doing that, it's going to save you a little bit of money and going to offset a lot of that monthly fee as well. Now, one thing to consider here is that these are object level configurations. So they're not at the bucket level. So if you've got a single bucket, it can contain different types of objects. So you can have an S3 standard object there. You can have something with S3 intelligent tiering. You can mix and match objects within a single bucket. Amazon S3 Glacier, it's Amazon's archiving solution and it provides the lowest cost storage for S3 objects. It still has 11 nines of durability across 3 availability zones, the same as the standard S3 class, but there are 3 retrieval options. So it's for very infrequently accessed stuff. So you can have expedited access. It's still going to take between 1 and 5 minutes to get access to those objects. You can have standard, which will take 3 to 5 hours, and bulk, which will take 5 to 12 hours. So each one of those options will have a different price point. But it's only good for very infrequently accessed objects that you want to archive for historical purposes, for record keeping and the like. A really powerful feature of the S3 service is the ability to create lifecycle management processes that can look after ensuring that objects are placed in the most appropriate S3 class based upon a lifecycle rule. So that lifecycle rule could delete an object after a certain expiry time. It could archive an object from Amazon S3 over to Amazon Glacier after an expiry time. So with these old objects, you can migrate those over to long-term storage and they can be restored back from Glacier to Amazon S3 if needed, but of course there's going to be a time limit or amount of time involved in doing that. Another very powerful feature of S3 is S3 versioning. So you can apply version control to all of your objects inside of a bucket. And what S3 will do is it will create copies of those objects inside a bucket. And so individual objects, they can be restored to a previous version. And also another great feature is that if you delete an object, you can recover it provided versioning is enabled on that bucket. Now, although the S3 service is a global service, the bucket and the objects within that bucket will be located within a specific region. And the S3 service will have a global index that will keep track of all of the information on the S3 service and where buckets and objects are located. So if your end user is in a different region to what your bucket is, then they're going to suffer from a reduced latency over what an end user inside of that region where the bucket is located. So a way of getting around that is with S3 cross-region replication, where we can have multiple buckets synchronized across multiple regions. Now, one thing to always be aware that take into consideration CloudFront. So if you want the maximum performance and you want things replicated across all regions, CloudFront is going to do that for you. But for whatever reason, you may need to access S3 directly and you want to do that with high speed across the globe, then cross-region replication is going to allow you to do that. Both your source and destination buckets, they'll need to have versioning enabled if you're going to be taking advantage of versioning. You can't just have it in one of those buckets. Now, the access control limits, they will be migrated across to from the source to the destination bucket. If S3 enabled encryption is in place on the source bucket, then that will be also replicated across the destination bucket. But that's not the case if it's key management service encryption. That will not be replicated across to a destination bucket. So the first start of the process is that you need to copy your existing objects within the source over to the different region, the different destination bucket region, before you can set up synchronization. And it always takes place between a pair of regions. It's not between 5 regions at once. You replicate a pair of regions. So if you want to do it across multiple regions, then you need to have a bucket, can be the source bucket for another cross-region replication. Amazon Macie will monitor your S3 buckets in a specific region and then alert you to any security issues that it finds. It uses machine learning and pattern matching to discover sensitive data, such as personally identifiable information, such as usernames and passwords, addresses, phone numbers, etc. It will also audit the access controls and encryption of those buckets. There's no charge for analysing up to 1 gig of data each month. Macie is enabled in a specific region with one click using the AWS Management Console or a single API call using one of the many software development kits or the command line interface. It will then continually monitor your S3 environment, looking for any sensitive information and any access or other security issues. It will then generate a CloudWatch event that can be used to alert you or to trigger some corrective action. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the lecture. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I look forward to seeing you in the labs coming up. Welcome back to Backspace Academy. In this lab on Amazon S3, we're going to be implementing version control on our bucket, And then we're going to look at implementing a life cycle management rule that can migrate old data in our bucket over to Amazon S3. So again, we start off in the S3 management console. There it is. And we're just going to very quickly create a bucket. So we'll create a bucket. We'll give this bucket a name. And we'll scroll down. We'll leave this as a private bucket, but we need to enable bucket versioning. And we'll scroll down. We'll leave everything else as it is, and we'll create this bucket. Okay, so that bucket has been created. I'll just go into it now. And what I'm going to do is upload some different versions of a file and see if I can find the different versions in the S3 management console. So I've created this file in Notepad, and all it does is just says this is version 1, and I'll change that later on. So I'm just going to upload this file. And click upload. Okay, so that's successfully uploaded. I'm just going to select and download that file. And open that file up now. And there we can see this is version 1, it says in that file. Now I'm just going to change that original file, and I'm just going to call it this is version 2 now. And save that. And I'm going to upload that again. And upload. Okay, so that's uploaded again. So let's have a look at this one. I'll just select it and download it. And this one now says this is version 2. So we've now got an updated version on there. Let's see if we can find where the old version was. Now to see our versions of this object, we need to select Show Versions just here. And there we can see we've got our multiple versions of this file. So what I'll do now is I'll select the older version. We can see here that this one was 203, and this is an older version here. So I'll select the older version and I'll download that. And then we can see this is version 1. I'll select the current version and download that. And there we can see this is version 2. Now one big advantage of this is not only can we go back to previous versions if we want just by deleting the current version, what we can also do is if we delete an object, we can recover that object as well. So I'm just going to turn off Show Version, so there still will be versioning enabled, but we just won't see the versions on the screen here. So there's our object. We can delete that now. So that deleted fine. And there we can see it says we don't have any objects in this bucket, but the object still exists as a version, even though it's been deleted. So if we go back and show versions, we can see here that we've got these same two versions, the original working version and the old version are still there, but we have a delete marker. So that delete marker just shows the user interface, not to show that object. So if we want to get it back, we can. And the simple way we get that back is by deleting the delete marker. So we'll select the delete marker and we'll delete that. And permanently delete, that's what we want. So that worked fine. And there we can see we're back to where we were before. And now if we go back to disabling show versions, we'll see there that our object has reappeared. So that's pretty good. So we can go back to old versions if we want, and also if we delete an object completely, we can get that back as well. So what I'd like to do now is just show you how to implement a lifecycle management rule that can get these old versions, instead of having them taking up space on Amazon S3, we can migrate them over to long-term, less expensive archiving on Amazon Glacier. So the way we do that is we go to Management and we create a lifecycle rule. We'll give that rule a name. And we're going to apply this to all the objects in the bucket, but we could limit that to certain types of objects. We could limit it just to documents or docx or something like that. But we're going to apply this to all objects in the bucket, and we just need to acknowledge that. Now, what do we want to do? We want to get our old versions of this object or these objects, and we want to migrate those over to long-term storage on Amazon Glacier. So this is what we want to do, is that we want to move non-current versions of objects to a different storage class. So we're going to implement a transition over to Glacier, and we're going to do that when these are older than 90 days. So we'll put in there 90 days, and we just acknowledge that there's going to be a cost involved in transferring these objects to Amazon Glacier. So that's pretty good. And we'll scroll down and review, and we can see here we're not going to do anything with the current versions, but any old versions we're going to migrate those over to Amazon Glacier when they're 90 days old. So that'll be good. So within 90 days, we'll be able to get old versions back. But over 90 days, we're going to have to go back to Amazon Glacier to get those back, and we can restore them from Amazon Glacier back to Amazon S3. And all we need to do is create that rule. So there is our rule. It's been enabled and implemented. So when these versions get to 90 days, they will automatically migrate and transition over to Amazon Glacier. So that brings us to the end of the lab. What I'll do now is just clean this up. So we go back to Amazon S3 main screen for our buckets. We'll find that bucket. There's our backspace versioning lab bucket. We'll first empty that. Okay, that was successful, and we just need to now delete that. Okay, so that's all been cleaned up. I hope you got a lot out of the lab, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.